We're live, Chairman.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Highways and Transport Cabinet Panel, Tuesday, 15th of June 2021 at 2 p.m. start time. First of all, an announcement for the COVID-19 attendance at this meeting guidelines. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, the Council will be holding this meeting electronically in accordance with the relevant regulations. Members of the public may also attend this meeting in an electronic capacity, and there's a link on the Council's website for them to do so. Members of the Council are asked to keep their microphones switched off until called to speak and switch their microphones off once they have finished speaking. Cameras may be left on throughout the meeting if members wish. Cameras should be switched on if and when you are speaking in the meeting. To indicate a wish to speak, members should use the raise hand function. Use of the meeting chat function is exclusively for voting. At the end of the debate on each item of business, there will be a vote. Members should vote using the meeting chat function by indicating for, against, or abstain, and I will declare the result after each vote. Officers are present at the meeting and will follow the same protocols. Breaks of at least 15 minutes will be held every 2 hours, and other breaks will be incorporated as appropriate. Okay, first of all, membership changes. There are none. First of all, I'd like to welcome all new members and all returning members to this panel. So that we all know who we are and the public know who we are, if I can ask you to introduce yourself in turn. I'll go by the order of business. First of all, I will introduce myself as Phil Bibby, the Executive Member for Highways and Transport, and then turn to James Bond.
We're just chasing James Bond, Chairman. He's not here yet.
Okay, Annie Brewster.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I'm Annie Brewster, and I am a councillor for Harpenden Rural and Vice Chairman of the County Council. Thank you.
Richard Butler.
Yeah, hi, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm Richard Butler. I represent Boreham Wood South Division in Hartsmere.
Okay, Stephen Cavender.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Steve Cavender, and I'm the newly elected member for Meriden Tudor.
Okay, Paul Clark.
Take yourself off mute first. Good afternoon. My name's Paul Clark. I'm the newly elected member for Hitchins South.
Okay, Stephen Giles Medhurst.
Stephen Giles Medhurst, the member for Central Watford Knoxsea, a Liberal Democrat group leader and opposition spokesperson on highways.
Jeff Jones.
Yeah, good afternoon. Jeff Jones. I'm the member for Buntyford in East Hertfordshire, and I was a previous member of this cabinet panel.
Graham McAndrew, who's also the vice chairman.
Yeah, Graham McAndrew, Deputy Cabinet Member, Transport Highways, and Bishop Stopford Rural.
Rena Ranger.
Hello, I'm Rena Ranger. I am the County Councillor for Rickmansworth East and Oxley Park.
Okay, and Sarah Talon.
Hi, my name is Sarah Talon. I'm the recently elected County Councillor for London Colney in St Albans.
Okay, hi Sarah. More announcements. I need to ask you all to declare any pecuniary or declarable interests. If I hear nothing, I assume that's a nil return. Okay, if I can just reiterate the membership and remit of the panel, please. Noting the membership of the panel as stated above and the remit, which is as follows: highways maintenance and improvements, new road and transport infrastructure delivery, traffic management, road safety, street lighting, provision of cycling and pedestrians or for cycling and pedestrians, transport planning and passenger transport, the local transport plan. Item 2 on the agenda, as there's only a few of us who were around in the last administration period, so I'll invite the panel to note the minutes of the meeting of the Highways and Environment Cabinet Panel, as it was then called, held on 17th of March 2021.
Agreed, Chair.
You the chat, please, to notes.
Okay.
My system's slow, Chairman.
Okay, noted. And just
Noted.
okay. Just to let you know, and I'll remind you, an update to the actions was sent electronically to members a few days ago. Item 3, public petitions were received. Highways and Environment Performance Monitor Q4 and is that right, Sarah?
Hi, Phil. I think I was going to start off with just a little bit of background to the report for the new members, and then Sarah will take over if that's okay.
Okay.
So good afternoon, panel. So I just wanted to start by setting a bit of context to the performance report that you've got in front of you. So the performance paper you have has developed and evolved over time. It was first introduced in this format in 2017 and moved away from the historical report, which tended just to provide information on how Ringway were performing. And what we wanted to do was to be able to show to members how the whole highway service was performing. Currently, we measure our performance across 57 individual indicators, which are then grouped together under one of 9 themes. So, for example, the customer journey theme has 9 individual measures beneath it, including such things as how we respond to customer inquiries, handling complaints, etc., all within time frame. The report is in 2 parts. There's a front cover sheet which provides an overarching summary, and then all the background data is included in Appendix A of the report. The first 2 pages, or 2.5 pages of Appendix A, show the overall scores for each of the themes with an overarching summary, and the remaining 20-odd pages of Appendix A include all the background information of the 57 individual measures. Each individual measure will be coded as red, amber, green, depending on how that element of the service is actually performing. And we've come up with this speedometer type approach to visually demonstrate at a glance how things are going. The score for a theme is the average of the individual measures. So, for example, a green indicator gets a score of 3, an amber a score of 1.5, a red a score of 0. So these are all summed up and then averaged, or the average is calculated for the theme. The report does evolve over time as we get requests for other information. And just to bear in mind that this report covers the period January to March 2021 and was for the Highways and Environment portfolio. And so next time some of those environmental measures, such as those referring to rights of way, will be dropped, and measures around transport will be included in future reports. We're aware that there's a lot of information in this report, so we're more than happy to set up separate briefing sessions for members if that would help, where we can go into more detail. And I'll now hand over to Sarah, whose job includes managing performance of our various contracts and who pulls this report together. And Sarah will do a brief summary of the information, and we're happy to take any questions at the end. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Steve, and good afternoon, members of the panel. As Steve said, I'm Sarah here, and I'm the Highways Contract and Performance Manager. And one of my roles is to oversee the overall performance for the highway service. Today I was just going to share a couple of the highlights of the 2021 Q4 performance. There was an increase of 0.13% in the overall performance, with an average score of 2.47 across all service areas, and as such, performance does remain stable. The main measure that saw a vast improvement during Q4 was the value of deemed permits, where this measure moved from the red zone in Q3 into the green zone in Q4. This was a result of vacancies within that service area being filled, which subsequently allowed the team to process more permits within time. Decreasing performance saw the percentage of stage 1 complaints that were escalated beyond stage 1 moved in the amber zone from into Q4, where it was in the green zone in the previous quarter. We did have an increase in the number of stage 1s that were received. However, only one complaint was upheld, but then was subsequently resolved to the customer's satisfaction. You may have seen, as you've gone through reports, some graphs have not been populated, and this is mainly those that are due to speed counts volunteering, which was subjected to the remit of COVID restrictions that were in place during Q4. So as the restrictions are starting to ease, we are now getting the information back in, so we are able to record those again. But for reporting purposes of Q4, we recorded those measures as green. And just as a side, we also measure the VXOs as green because those measures were provided quarterly in arrears. So we didn't have any measures available for Q4 at that point. They're the main areas to kind of bring to your attention to highlight from Q4. So thank you for your time. And if you've got any queries or comments, we can open that up if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. So any questions or comments, please, if you can put your virtual hand up. Stephen.
I was hesitating there to let others come in first, Chair. Two things. A lot of these have just got figures on in terms of percentages, but no actuals. And I have raised this at a pre-briefing meeting with officers. Actually having some context in terms of actual figures would make it more relevant in terms of the percentages you have here in many of them. Sorry, my main computer's just annoyingly frozen. Thankfully, I printed one page off. Appendix 1 insurance, however, indicates nearly £6 million of insurance claims have been paid out over the last 6 years. And in the preamble to that, it refers to 2 large insurance claim losses of more or equal £100,000. And these refer to pothole claims in relation to cyclists. But says no further information is available, basically. What's the background to those? Because they are quite significant in terms of it. And it would appear, although it's not quite clear, from the insurance claim calls graph, that the number of claims has gone down, but the value of the claims has gone up. If you know, the number of claims has dropped, for instance, 1,000 in the policy period 2019 to 20. But actually paying out 1.2 million of actual claims, yet there were yet in 2016-17 there was 1,300 account claims for 1 million. So it's there does seem to be larger amounts being paid out in some areas. Now, is this because of the nature of the damage caused to either the individual or the vehicle or the cyclist? And I appreciate some of the answers of these may not be available at this point in time, Chairman. And I appreciate officers might want to get back to me.
Okay. Are you able to add anything, Sarah or Steve?
I think just from, go on, Sarah.
No, go on, it's fine.
I think from my point of view, what we've noticed over time by working with the insurance section, we did see a high volume of claims coming in a few years ago. These tending to be motoring related claims for damage to wheels, etc. So high volume, but relatively low value. You only have to have 1 or 2 cycling incidents on the network. They may be rare, but then they do tend to be quite high value because of the level of injuries sustained. We can certainly go away and get more information about the 2 claims that we've got. Bear in mind some of that information may be confidential, so we won't necessarily be able to openly share it at a public panel meeting.
If you can let the panel know, Steve, that's the best thing to do.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions?
I didn't hear any of that because my system completely disconnected. But I appreciate it. Or Steve will get back to me separately. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't hear anything of what Steve said.
Okay.
Whole system just crashed.
Okay. Are there any other points or questions? I can't see any hands. Hold on, I've got a chat coming in for myself. Yeah, no, that, yeah. Yeah, I think we all seem to have problems with our bandwidth today, but hopefully we can muddle through. I can't see any more questions, so if I can therefore ask panel to note the report for Q4 2020-21. Please vote in chat. Okay, that was noted, thank you. So we now go on to item 5, electric vehicle charging infrastructure strategy. Is Sue going to be speaking, or Rupert? Oh, obviously Rupert.
Yeah, I'll present it, and then Sue and Greg are here if there's any detailed queries. So in the light of the move towards the electrification of the vehicle fleet and Hertfordshire's support of it as set out in LTP4, we've been working on the development of a electric vehicle charging strategy and a position piece that's set out in the attached panel paper that fundamentally says that whilst there is a place for on-street parking, Hertfordshire advocates a move towards destination charging facilities as it thinks it's the best way to meet the future demand and use of electric vehicles on the network as they become commonplace as we move towards the 2030 ban on petrol and diesel vehicles. That's informed for a number of reasons. One is the fast changing technology that vehicle manufacturers are developing almost on a weekly basis, with cars with longer range, faster charging times, and an ability to be used much more akin to how an existing fossil fueled vehicle would be. Secondly, the market is responding to that with more and more destination charging type facilities popping up, with people like Tesco's, owners of large retail parks, and private investment companies setting up electric vehicle charging stations. And there is an application for one of those at the moment in Hertfordshire and Stevenage. and we believe that that will continue to be the case with a number of the existing fuel firms moving towards providing forecourt type electric vehicle charging facilities where you'll be able to charge a vehicle up with 250 plus miles in a relatively short time, maybe 20 minutes, half an hour max. The fact that as those ranges increase, people will be using their cars more to go to places, and the range anxiety that has driven this desire for regular charging will start to diminish. So we've looked at the long-term future of electric vehicle charging and think that by and large on street, outside properties that don't have their own driveways or garages where they can charge will be a short-term requirement, and that we will work where necessary to help meet that demand where it might continue to exist in the future. There's 4 key points that I'd ask the panel to consider in point 2.6 in the paper, which is how we should enable residents without access to charging facilities at the moment to charge them in the future, and as workplaces and supermarkets and others get them. I think that's something to be considered. Whether we should be providing direct support to the districts and boroughs who we would like to work very closely with to help them facilitate electric vehicle charging facilities in their car parks, of which there are many of them around the county in prime locations where people choose to travel to use the services that are available within those towns, and places where people tend to stay for 2 to 3 hours fairly often, which would enable them to get a full charge on a vehicle fairly easily. And whether we should be looking to require developers to go over and above the current standards of sort of 10 or 20% in some instances of electric vehicle charging infrastructure in new developments, and whether or not we're prepared to how much more resource we put into the position statement along the lines that is currently set out in the draft strategy that's attached to this paper. I think there's lots and lots to this, Phil, so it might be better to go to questions and we can take them as we go through. Otherwise, I can read the whole paper out, really.
Good move. Yeah, good move. Richard.
Sorry, getting used to this new technology on this device. I'm used to Apple. Yeah, so my question is, you were saying about working with boroughs and district councils. Have you done any work alongside housing associations and groups like that as well? I appreciate some of the flat units have large car parks and obviously are near Hertfordshire-owned land and assets anyway. So I just wondered if you'd be working along housing associations as well as district and borough councils.
We'd like to work with all public authorities, really, Richard, I think, in short, to see what we can do to create a joined up comprehensive network of electric vehicle charging facilities across the county. We haven't to date, and the point of this paper and the draft strategy or the draft position piece that we've got is to start that engagement more broadly so that we can see and understand the appetite of private businesses, housing associations and others to the approach that we're potentially taking.
Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Yeah, Rupert, good to see this this draft coming forward. It is something that we've been discussing recently at a local level, at a district level. We recently had discussions with David Thorogood on a programme that he's putting forward for rural charging in rural areas. That is obviously a concern for me, who is in a rural area, of course. And I think that there's 2 issues there. There's the putting in community, or I feel like public charging points in rural areas, and charging on streets in rural areas. So, I mean, if you look at a ZapMap for my particular division, Bundyford in East Hertfordshire, it's a big black hole. There are no public charging points at all. The nearest may be Royston, or further down south, probably Ware, and across the Bishop Stortford. So there is a big black hole that needs addressing, and it was good to see that East Herts were looking at that. But there is an issue. There we are trying to encourage residents, people to make that sort of modal shift to electric, which we're all keen to do. But it really does require the infrastructure, and I know that definitely does put people off at the moment, especially in the rural areas. Towns, I don't think there's an issue, but it puts them off making that shift, especially from the home charging point of view. So if you haven't got off-street parking, the on-street charging, especially in rural areas, is an issue. And so, do we consider, being able to use our lighting columns for charging? Or I did see somewhere, I was looking on the internet, and I forget where it was, a particularly borough were putting in, they were like channels through the pavement where you could where the charging cables wouldn't be visible, so there's no trip hazard there, etc. So I just wondered what sort of work has been done on that, because I do think it's a difficult one. I must admit, it's a difficult one to find the answer for in rural areas. So yeah, keen to hear your thoughts on that, Rupert.
My two pennyworth on that. I think Sue wants to come in when Sue will handle that. I mean, as people will say, you wouldn't put a petrol pump outside or on the road outside someone's house, would you? So why put an electric charging station? So
because it only takes a few minutes, Phil, to fill your car.
Yeah,
petrol.
If you've got sufficient charging points at charging centres, destination charging, it will negate or reduce the need on street. But street hasn't got a place if it can be managed correctly, and perhaps Sue can come in on that.
Yeah.
So we recognise the sort of issue with access to charging points, particularly in certain areas of the county. So you'll see in our position 1 in the sort of paper, we sort of say that we'll support residents without access to private drives or garages to access alternative charging facilities, where they're not easily available. Now we're already sort of doing some mapping work, kind of in our teams, to sort of identify where those properties are without that access to private driveways, where existing charging points are, where potentially you could have charging points, so where the sort of public or privately owned car parks are, where you've got those potential for destination charging. And what we're intending to do is to kind of use that analysis to identify where those gaps are, where those geographical gaps are going to be, and then we can sort of start picking up conversations with others about how we sort of try and fill those gaps in charging. I mean, some other authorities have sort of set thresholds, sort of saying that kind of residents should have access to charging points within a sort of a 5-minute walk or so. We haven't kind of yet set thresholds on that basis, but that's kind of one way we could sort of look at it. We've got to have sort of further conversations with districts again about sort of filling those gaps, and it'd be certainly useful to pick up on the work that East Herts are doing as well.
Yeah, I think returning to Phil's point, Jeff, I'd say we're still at a fairly early stage in terms of both the technology and the infrastructure that's available. And as you look into the future, electric vehicles are going to have much bigger ranges, much more akin to your 300 miles sort of tank of fuel that should take that need for charging regularly to be removed. And also the charging, if you can get the power requirements into a facility, they think that you're going to be charging within 15 to 20 minutes, which is very different to having to sit. If you were talking about charging an electric vehicle up now in a lot of places, it's a 4 to 6 hour process. And I fully agree that you're not going to want to go and sit on a forecourt somewhere for 4 or 6 hours in your car while it charges up. But as we get more down to the anywhere between half an hour and 2 hours, which is quite feasible at a destination or at a workplace, you're going to be going into the office for the morning or the afternoon or the day, you book your space, turn up, leave your vehicle on charge while you're at work, and then it's charged up for the week, which will remove a lot of this on-street infrastructure that potentially has its own challenges around how it gets installed, how it gets maintained, the challenges of cables and management of those. The point you make about lamp columns is one that we have considered, and it's worth noting that I don't think the stock in Hertfordshire is necessarily easily converted en masse, which would be one thing, and B, a lot of lamp columns are placed at the back of the footway for the very reason that they're there to light the footway as well as the carriageway. And really you need them at the front of the footway if you're going to be doing electric vehicle charging with them. So you know, again, just to do that is quite a lot of changes to the infrastructure to make it possible. And if you do that, you often make what are already narrow footways narrower because you're moving it from up against a building to 450 mil back from the edge of curb, which reduces that effective width of footway, which has its own challenges in a lot of these areas. And just in terms of understanding the context, I think we're looking at something like 25% of properties in Hertfordshire don't have the ability for off-street parking. So it's a notable amount, but equally, when you start to get rapid charging stations, workplaces, supermarkets, places that people do go to fairly regularly, having an ability to charge a vehicle, you know, the amount that you're going to need on street, even in rural communities, is probably going to be significantly less than you rightly point out. If you wanted an electric vehicle today, it's much more of a challenge, but give it 18, 24, 36 months, the picture will have changed considerably from what we're picking up. And as for channels and things under footways, I think it's something we'd need to be very, very cautious about. It's much more a network management area than it is a strategy area. But when you start allowing people to make changes, you know, be it lift the cover and put it back, what happens if they don't put it back properly and somebody falls over it? Now, all of those things that become quite difficult to manage.
Yeah, I agree. It's not a straightforward fix. But just to point out that, fast charging, wonderful. Apparently it's very expensive to install fast chargers, and which is probably fine in a town centre, etc., in a high use area. But I think for, if you like, domestic home charging, you do need to be able to have a facility for just low.
That's what we'd get. You know, if you put them in a street, I think you get a 4 or 7 watt kilowatt charger that takes several hours for a vehicle to charge up. There is a limit to the amount you can have on any given street because of the power demands, and some streets are capable of taking more than others. But you're right in terms of getting power to a dedicated facility. In some ways, it's easier to run one big cable to one facility that can run lots of rapid chargers than it is to sprinkle about a medium-sized charger to lots of different locations. So, again, working with UKPM, we can start to identify areas that have got existing good power demands, or where you're going to need to run new power supplies to meet the demand of a new facility and make sure that it can do it. And we've been working with a couple of the districts on bids to support that particular approach, where if they're going to be making changes to a car park or building a new one, make sure that it's got the right power supply to be able to do the right thing in terms of that 2-hour type of charge that we're looking at going forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Rupert.
We do hear that some districts are actually making this work on street charging. We will often look to them to find out how, because one of the questions I'm keep on asking myself, okay, even if you had, for example, 5 charging points along a page, how do you stop people parking there all night and stopping anyone else using the same point? They're not going to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning with a dressing gown and unplug the car and move it so someone else can use it. So I'd be interested to know how these things are managed without having fights on the street for people wanting to charge their car. Anyway, Rena.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just had some questions with regards to the position statements that we had there. At 2.6 is where I'm looking. So the first position statement, which is about providing some charging points for those residents who don't have access to a private garage or drive, and there are the various conditions that need to be met. Technically, that could be a whole street that is a street that is maybe a terrace house or something like that, which doesn't have parking provisions, which is not near a car club, not near somewhere local. And what does that mean for, well, the whole street? And in other areas, what would that mean for the churn of off-street parking? And as you know, Councillor Bibby just raised, what does that mean for other people who may want to park their cars? I know the reports mentioned perhaps putting TROs in place, but we wouldn't want to unfairly penalise people who don't have an electric vehicle, who then can't park outside or anywhere near where they live. I was just also wondering, in certain cases, I think you've mentioned before, would there be collaborations with supermarkets or any kind of large a retailer or office provider, even office spaces where the offices are free overnight or something like that, just to help things along. The second thing I wanted to ask is at 4.2.3, we are talking about new builds and making sure that developers have some obligation to put in the charging points. I know a lot of the districts are working on their local plans. We will be having newer builds. We have areas where houses get converted into flats. When parking standards are not rigorously adhered to by district councils, there is a shortfall. And if there is, because in certain areas, or I think Hertfordshire as a whole has perhaps an aging population, we attract families, we have residents with different issues in terms of mobility and things like that, where a car may be necessary. If you have a deficit of parking standards, who is liable for that? Is it the planning authority, or where does Hertfordshire County Council get involved? If you have, 500 flats going up and somebody decides only 200 parking spaces are enough, potentially you could have, 1,200, very bad maths, but vehicles, you get the gist of it. So, and if we think that at some point in the future, most cars may be electric, where will they be parked? And what we are saying now, 25% of our residents don't have access to off-street parking. By the end of the next phase, that could be a lot higher because we've built a lot more and people have not provided. And the last thing that I just wanted to ask, what would be our aspirational percentage for car parks that are owned by councils to have charging points? I think it says in the report Oxfordshire has 7.5% or something like that of spaces which are electric. What do you think would be an aspirational number for our boroughs and districts? Thank you.
Should we start the other way around, and you might have to remind me of a couple of those questions, Rena, as we go through, because there's quite a few there. So in terms of aspirational levels of EV charging facilities, I think that's very dependent on where technology gets to and the range of vehicles and how often people are going to need to charge, which is a bit of a balance that we're trying to strike at the moment. But I think that kind of 10% in the first instance to make sure that there's a chance of you being able to get to a charging facility. The other thing is as technology seeks to enable people, and you can book a space at a time rather than just turning up at the car park and hoping there's one available. I think technology is going to be quite a key tool for us to be able to optimize the use of electric charging facilities in public spaces as we go forward as well, which might mean that 10% is probably about right. But even if there's more pressure on it, it can be managed more effectively to make it work. However, I think passive provision and making sure that there is a sufficient power supply to places is probably more key than actually the number of chargers in the first instance, so that if you need more, they're able to be provided rather than it needing a full upgrade to the network or something like that that's much more investment hungry in the first instance. I think getting the power supply into developments and making sure that they've got some long-term ability to be flexible is quite a key consideration, alongside all of the other power demands that are going to come, as we go forward and seem to become more dependent on electricity. In relation to parking standards, that's a really, really difficult one, and very much tied to local transport plan 4, demand and supply. How do you limit, people's potential desire to have a vehicle? Because they've got other ways that they can get around sufficiently well without all needing to own their own car versus those that do need to. And parking standards are obviously a very important tool to that. And certainly we wouldn't be advocating developments that have a space for every individual that's living there. And we do encourage minimum levels of parking provision. But things like car clubs, shared services all provide that flexibility, and it's very important that they're built into developments going forward so that people don't feel the need to necessarily own a vehicle, but they've got access to one when they want it, and that should help to minimise the amount of parking spaces that are necessary and have a different approach to vehicle ownership that's happened to date really in the county, and they're starting to come through new developments as they come forward. And I think the points you made around the challenges of managing electric vehicle spaces versus traditional parking spaces, depending on what vehicle, are all valid and noted. And one of the challenges about managing on-street provision within sort of controlled parking areas that Phil alluded to earlier. How do you manage those spaces and make sure it's equitable for all users?
I can just come in on the planning side of it, Rupert, because one of the bees in my bonnet, we have the parking standards. We're developing our place and movement design guide for developers. And obviously we will give recommendations as a statutory consultee on planning applications for developments. What we say doesn't have to be included in planning obligations. It's up to the LPA, either districts, to actually work with us to make sure that what we suggest is the right thing to do is actually done. So they have a battle sometimes with developers on viability issues to say, well, this is what we want, and we will be working as strongly as we can with districts to make sure that message gets through. And that's one of the reasons we're doing our place movement design guide, to make it perfectly clear what everyone sees as reasonable when developing new housing developments. So okay, Rupert?
Yep.
Yeah. Now I've got two Stephens now. So Stephen Giles Meadows first, please.
Thank you, Chair. On that last point, of course, the parking standards criteria, of course, was completely thrown out to some extent in 1997 with John Prescott, who changed the goalposts, said actually if you're near a sustainable transport location, a developer does not need to provide any off-street parking. And of course, those of us who represent urban divisions well know that's the case, and therefore developers come along with no parking provision, and there's nothing the local planning authority can do about it. What concerns me about the report, or the questions around it, is where is it going? Because it's saying the purpose is to endorse a number of position statements to support. What's not clear is where are the milestones to 2020-30 to get the EV charging infrastructure in to encourage people, and indeed necessarily provide the structure for when the government says the sale of diesel and electric vehicles new diesel and electric vehicles will cease in 2030. You know, we've got 9 years less than 9 years left. And how quickly are we going to get any of this infrastructure? And you say there's a plan application in Stevenage, there's some indicative drawings or potential other ones elsewhere in terms of an EV one. And what I'm not clear about is where this is going in terms of the infrastructure, and whether it's ambitious enough, whether the money is there, and indeed who is going to provide these charging points. Now, the government has made money available, and in my own area that I represent, the Borough Council has been successful in bidding for that, and is in the process of installing a large number, the majority of which are in my division, of EV on-road charging points. And I think we have the most EV on-road charging points, although it's not replicated, I see in the appendix there in Hertfordshire. And Phil, coming back to your point, what we are trialling in Watford are on-road sensors which detect whether a vehicle is actually being plugged in and charged. And if it's not, they will get a fixed penalty notice. So it can be done. The sensors have been installed in a parking zone, and it's not just for EV vehicles, it's in fact all vehicles in those parking zones. So it also detects whether they have a parking permit. What concerns me, however, is the intention. Supermarkets have less of an issue with, but private car parks, and remember, not all local authorities have municipal car parks. Private car parks, and indeed municipal ones for that matter, of course, charge by and large. There are some exceptions to that, as Rena well knows, but by and large, most are charged. So actually, if you want to go and charge your vehicle and it's in a car park, but you normally park outside your home, you're not in the CPZ, you then have to go and pay to park in the car park for 3 hours to charge your vehicle. That doesn't seem to be replicated in the paper as to how we get over that particular headache of double charging. I am paying for my electric, I'm paying to park. The only place I can go and park is in a public car park where I've got to pay £3 every time I want to charge my vehicle every other day. That doesn't seem reasonable. And I'm also charging for the electric through my card, through my supplier. Now, the other thing that concerns me is position statement 1. What is not clear on position statement 1 is whether the county council is going to veto on-road charging or not, because it has been made it difficult for some authorities to install these. And I know of Ofsted discussions locally and the difficulty of getting these in places where we wanted, where local officers wanted to have them. So it says it will not enable large-scale rollout of on-street EV charging, except for limited users, limited circumstances, but then doesn't detail what the limited uses, what limited circumstances are. Now, if the question is in urban areas, which I represent by and large, we're going to say no, then there's no way I can support this. Because at the moment, that's the only source, unless you have a private driveway, you can charge a vehicle. And they are controlled in a controlled parking zone. So I am concerned about the direction of travel. I appreciate in the long term, the ideal situation should be you go and do your Sainsbury's shopping, and if you have to drive to do it, you park in the car park for 45 minutes, do your shopping, and your vehicle's fully charged. We're clearly not yet there yet. And indeed, one has to say, in certain urban areas, will we ever be there? For instance, in my ward division, I wouldn't want someone who has an electric vehicle who lives in Shaftesbury Road to have to go to drive to Sainsbury's car park to charge their car, to drive back home, when actually they could walk there quicker than driving around the ring road and the one-way system to get to the car park to charge their vehicle. So I think we have to have both in urban areas. In certain condensed urban areas with terrace streets, you will both have to have your charging stations at petrol stations, which will then be EV chargers, car parks, and on road. The way this position statement implies that in future it's only going to be commercially operated off-street charging. I'd like clarification on that, please. And I may come back later. Thank you, Chair.
I'll ask Ruth to come back on sort of timescales and all that sort of stuff, which is going to be driven by the market more than anything, I think. But I'll try and answer a lot of your questions by a simple phrase. This is not a strategy, it's a position statement. And what it is there to do is to stimulate discussion with districts so that we all agree how we're going forward. We're not putting down any firm guidelines yet. We're basically opening it up for discussion to try and find out how the best way to tackle this is. So I think what the questions you asked are based on, this is our strategy. We're going to veto this if it doesn't agree. We don't agree with it. But that is not the case, is it, Rupert?
No, it's not. It's a position piece to inform a discussion and engagement process with somewhere to start from, rather than, I think we've all struggled over the last 12 months to understand, you know, who's going where and who's doing what, and lots of different people having different conversations about many things. And this is to try to bring some of that together with a bit of a focus, asking people some fairly fundamental questions around, you know, what business model are you looking at? How's it going to work long term rather than just responding in the short term, which is potentially where the government direction is taking us at the moment. And your point, I think, about somebody having to drive to Sainsbury's is an example of that, Stephen, to get their car charged. If you look 3-5 years down the road to this, it's not going to be such a concern to you as to where you're going to charge your vehicle. There will be charging facilities, rapid charging facilities that you'll be able to utilise. So you're going from Watford to meet a friend in Hemel, you will pass a charging facility on the way where you'll be able to charge your car fairly quickly and fairly easily. If you haven't needed to go to Tesco's, where you can park free and book your space to charge your vehicle, that everything is pointing towards the fact that electric vehicle charging, certainly in the medium term, is going to be a kind of almost like your club card kind of thing. It's an added value that businesses are going to start to put to their customers. So, you know, you go and visit their car park because their price of electricity is cheaper, or they let you charge for free for an hour. It's that kind of different market model that's starting to emerge as it becomes more mainstream, and you know, the market will respond to that as it recognises the uptake in electric vehicles, rather than to date, because the demand hasn't been there, it's stayed out of it. That investment starting to actually take place and will start to evolve quite quickly is what we're picking up from the experts that we've been in discussion with. I don't know, Sue, if you've got a point to raise on some of that as well.
Yeah, I think it was just to sort of reiterate Phil's point, really, that, you know, this is a position statement to open up that dialogue. We've started sort of listing out some draft actions and the intention is to kind of then discuss those with sort of districts in a series of workshops. Also get sort of providers like the sort of Charge Master, BP Charge Master, and some of the, you know, kind of potential destination charging points kind of involved in that discussion as well, to really sort of work through, okay, almost like a bit of an action plan, you know, once we're sort of agreed on these initial positions, how do we then get to the, you know, the point where we've got a kind of reliable sort of charging network that's accessible to kind of all our residents.
Yeah, the other point, Phil, is that I think if we can all work effectively together, there is a great opportunity there for authorities to engage with the supplier and seek to get some of the potential reward from it financially. So, you know, like I said, the districts and boroughs car parks are in prime locations where people want to go. If you were to offer that to the market and say, who wants to work with us to put rapid fast charging technology in our car park, and what does that deal look like for us? And you were to do that across 5 or 10 of the district's authorities, that's probably quite an attractive offer to the market that carries some financial rewards with it. But again, they're all things that can be discussed, and I think working as a group of authorities gives us much more opportunity to make the most of it. Equally, making sure that there's technology and the operators are able to work consistently across the county, so that if you change from one town to another, you can all use the same technology and it's charged in the same way, which gives people a bit more confidence in investing in a vehicle rather than having to have 20 apps on their phone depending where they're going, that kind of thing.
Oh, please, I don't want that. That's the last thing we need. But you're quite right. I mean, industry will work with us and vice versa, because the suppliers will have their own view and what they think is commercially viable, and they will put their kit where they think they can earn the biggest buck or provide the best service. So it's not just down to what we or districts want to do, it's down to what they want to do as well. And hopefully, if we all work together closely, we won't be going off into the VHS Betamax scenario. We will actually have a standard approach right across the country, which is my fear is if we don't work like that, we will get that. So that's Stephen Cavender.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed in the report there are a couple of cursory comments in regard to consultation with car clubs. And I wonder if we aren't just missing an opportunity here. It's obvious to me, at least, that people are going to become much more reliant on car clubs. And I wondered whether officers had considered the feasibility of a Hertfordshire-wide EV car club.
We have, and we've had some discussions with districts and boroughs around that. Equally, we did the same with kind of hire bikes and some of the other mass mobility solutions that are out there. And I think it's the same discussion really around the electric vehicle charging provision. It's actually making sure that we all work closely together, Stephen, to make it work. And if there is a joined up approach that everybody's signed up to, I'm sure as an authority, we're happy to assist in that process to see what we can do. And like you say, in many ways, that could make it easier for everybody. So, yes, but I think there's some challenges around that, and everybody needs to make sure they're clear on what they want to achieve and maybe how we do it as one joined up approach rather than separate ones.
Yeah, I mean, and I get that there will be some challenges, but equally, I think we have to pursue that because there are challenges if you don't do it. Yep. Just simplistically, if I, let's say I go to North Hertfordshire for the day, I stay there overnight, and then I come back the following day, that car is doing nothing for a long period of time. And I might have to find another car from another user. But if there's a Hertfordshire-wide service in place, then it's all done through the same system, which seems to make an awful lot of sense to me.
Yep. I'd agree, and I'm sure we will have some of those discussions as part of the wider EV position piece chats. But if Phil and others are happy, we're happy to broaden it out and start those points slightly separate, but also slightly joined up. So yeah, it's hard to separate them into their own little compartments. So I think it would well be worth us having those discussions while we've got officers in the room. and members, because there will be member workshops that follow on once we've got the detail. Yep.
Thank you.
Annie.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, a couple of things. First of all, it amuses me when we talk about the physical room for charging points. And I don't know, when we were little, everyone had one car. You get 4, 5 or 6 people in it with no seat belts. And now we see so many people just with one car, just one person in each car. And I foresee it's crystal ball time whether we can have a little pod where we could strap on what we need to it, be it for the mattress to the dump or golf clubs or whatever. But it'd be really interesting to see how other countries are doing this, Rupert, who are ahead of us, because perhaps we're modelling something that actually won't actually be our model. For those of you who, I'm sure a lot of you have got the same as me, we've got some areas where people have got a van and several cars as well, which is ridiculous. So that was one thing. A couple of other things. The case studies, have you seen either of these in Milton Keynes or Essex? How long does it take to actually charge your car up? And does one sit in the car waiting for it? And how does one bump someone else out of the way? So that's that question. And the last thing, supporting modal shift. Is there a place for us to be looking at electric points for bikes? Yeah. And is it something, I've seen there are solar ones that if they work very well, but if it's something that, a bit like our SIDS, if we could match fund with our parish councils, perhaps it would give a very strong message out there that we are taking this really seriously. Thank you.
So I think the position piece does outline that we're supportive of electric vehicle charging for e-bikes, potentially scooters if they become mainstream, that sort of thing. And yes, we'd support that along with taxis and other sort of passenger transport provision where necessary. So that's a yes. I don't know about the locality budgets and highways locality budget spend, but I would think there's room for manoeuvre there as these sorts of technologies become more mainstream. And again, it might be those sorts of destinations that are the places you want the charge. So if someone's come on their bike and the red lights come on the handlebars as they've got towards the town, they think, oh God, I want to charge up, so I make sure I can get home with my French stick or my shopping in my bag. That's what they need to do, and we need to make sure there's that ability for that to happen. So that's a yes. In terms of the kind of broader changes to mobility, there's massive shifts going on at the moment. We've touched on car clubs, we've touched on the different types of vehicles that are starting to emerge. You tend to think that maybe vehicles will start to shrink in size again as they need to become lighter weight and become more efficient as they're reliant on electric power, but that will be down to the manufacturers and what they think they can sell. And certainly I think that shared economy is going to play a part in this. The models of ownership have already changed quite a lot, and they're probably going to continue to, with new generations that appear not to be so keen to learn to drive and get their driving license and look to other ways to get around. So they might be more reliant on providers, be they person-driven ones or autonomous ones as we go forward. But part of that challenge is you could actually end up with more vehicles on the road through the demand rather than less. And as such, we still need to have that ambition to get people to think about how they're going to travel and enable them to do it differently. And ideally, walk and cycle for the journeys where it's possible, or get the bus for some of the others, so that we keep a balance that means people can still get about freely and ideally easily when they need to.
Yeah, and the and there's those big mega high speed charging centres. Yes, how do they work?
I've only seen the Milton Keynes one, and I think it's a bit of a, well, it is very much part of the catapult there, so it's a bit of a trial site. And I think the intention is you have a space, you leave your car there. I think the charging time at the moment is anything between 20 minutes and an hour. And you collect it, and in the meantime, I suppose you can stay in it, or you'd go off and possibly sit in a cafe, or that kind of thing. I think Greg's probably knows more about them than I do. So
coming in.
Yeah, sure. They have quite a few different things that you can do. So they have really strange things, like you can have guided walks that, depending on how long your charge takes. They have like a 5-minute walk, a 15-minute walk. They have coffee cafes, small shops and stuff available. But a lot of the time people sit in the cars as well. They have Wi-Fi points available. They have other things around sort of so you can collect your Amazon parcels, your certain retail delivery centres as well, so you can pick up parcels. So there's quite a few things, but there's quite a lot of ideas on different things that you can put in to use up that time. But that's what they're testing at the minute. I quite like the guided walks. I think that's quite a good idea. Yeah.
Genius. Thank you.
Sure. And they will continue to change, Annie. I think that's the other thing. As the market starts to stabilise and evolve, the model will become clearer as to what works for people. And I suppose even the way people operate as individuals is changing. Who'd have thought 30 years ago that everybody would spend every spare second looking at their phone? So, it's kind of, it's very different as to how they'll settle in. But I think there'll be something around, you charge when you're at work, you charge when you go somewhere, leave your car, and then there'll be these rapid ones where you probably shoot in, get a cup of coffee, have a read for 20 minutes, and then you're off, and you've got 80% charge to get you to where you really want to go.
I remind everyone of the highway code where they reckon you shouldn't drive more than 2 hours, you should have a break. So this is an ideal opportunity. Take them a cup of coffee. Ben. Ben in the house.
Hi, Chair. Thank you very much. I appreciate I'm not a member of the panel. I just had a quick question, if that's okay. I was intrigued by the challenge C3 in the report. I think it's page 12 to on-street parking, and I think it sort of argues that LTP4 kind of runs contrary to the idea of on-street parking, because it would encourage people to be at home, who are at home to go for short journeys. Just kind of contrasting that with the destination charging model, where you've got your car at home, but it needs to be charged. You're going to go out, but you would opt to take your car with you because it needs to be charged somewhere. I'm just concerned that maybe LTP4 would actually argue for the on-street charger outside your home rather than the destination charging model.
I think it's a tricky one, isn't it, in terms of how people start to normalise their use of electric vehicles and what that looks like. And yes, you could argue you could have a charger outside your house because it might mean you're not going to travel, but you're only charging it to travel somewhere. Equally, if you're charging it when you're travelling somewhere, why does that mean it necessarily has to be an extra journey? Because if it's just part of your routine, you're going to be going shopping, you need a vehicle anyway. Why wouldn't you just do it then rather than having to make a special journey? I think humans are generally inherently lazy, so they're probably not going to want to do extra journeys if they don't need to. So I think it works both ways, and I think there will be a balance to be struck. I do think that there are quite a lot of infrastructure challenges to getting the scale of on-street infrastructure that potentially is needed to serve a largely electric fleet, and a fleet that isn't all necessarily based around residents. You're going to have delivery vehicles, all sorts of other vehicles that are going to need access to this infrastructure to charge, and managing it is going to be really, really difficult if it's sprinkled out across the network in lots of different locations that are going to need, like I say, very tight management to make it effective, whereas destinations are maybe a slightly more simple approach to it. But undoubtedly there will be a blend, but yeah, I think it's a fair point. It's just understanding human behaviour and nature as we move into it being normalised.
Might be an interesting thing to encourage an electric vehicle user forum in Hertfordshire to get their views on what they think they would use and how they want to treat charge their cars, etc. It'd be interesting to get their point of view on it. Paul.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate that. I have concerns whereby for existing housing stock, a lot of what we seem to be talking about is normal Monday to Friday 9 to 5 jobs. With new housing, their local planning authorities are putting in place that they have to have chargers, so that covers that. It's the terraced houses that we've got. I think Rupert said 25% of Hertfordshire has that type of stock, so that's what, 250, 300,000 houses. And is the car ruling the individual, or is the individual, taking ownership of, what they want to do, how they want to work? We don't know going forward, as we come out of COVID, what it's going to do. But say I go to visit my son in Nottingham and then come back. I'm lucky I would be able to charge on my driveway, but I come back, say at 2 o'clock in the morning. The last thing I want to do is go down to a car park, which is, quite some way away, and charge up, especially if I've got to go into work the next morning. Because that seems not to be, a good way of doing it. There is in my division a number of terraced houses with no off-road parking. So, I do urge that we go down that route. We've got to pay attention to the existing housing stock. And also, I believe Stephen asked about timescales for this. We're about to get an explosion. 2030 is not that far away. The number of charging points we've got is going to have to expand quite rapidly going forward, whether that's public car park charging, because I understand, Phil, your discussion, we don't have a petrol pump at home, but going forward we are going to get quite a lot of electric cars in the next 5, 8, 9 years.
You're right, if you're happy for me to answer that, Phil. I think there's two things there, Paul. One is, and I sound like a broken record, but as technology improves, you're going to be able to charge vehicles much more quickly and much more easily. And as the market for electric vehicles expands, there will be more provision for them through either the economy or through facilities that are provided by local authorities. So if you are coming back from Nottingham, late in the evening, and your car's starting to, I can't imagine that on that journey and somewhere within 50 miles of home that you will not be able to find a rapid charging facility in the not too distant future. I'm not saying you could if you wanted to do it today. I think that would be quite a challenge. And yes, I agree with the scenario you're putting forward. But in the next year or two, I can't imagine, as you're heading back into one of Hertfordshire's towns, that there won't be a rapid charging facility where you would be able to drop in there for maybe 10 minutes. Not massively different to charging, to refilling your tank as you would at the moment, to give you enough charge to be able to make sure you were confident to be able to get to work the next day, where there should be a destination charger where you can leave it on for longer and get a full range from your vehicle. So I think that it's how we're going to adapt and how the environment's going to change to facilitate electric vehicles is quite important. And from what we've been researching and from what you read on the news, it is rapidly changing. A number of the fuel station providers that we've got at the moment, sprinkled around the county, as businesses, are looking about how much of that space should be given over to electric vehicle charging and what that looks like. And as that happens in the next few years, and they'll be building up to 2030 as well. And let's not forget, it's not that all the fleet will change on 2030. It's that the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles will cease. So there'll still be a big proportion of the fleet will still be petrol and diesel, but it will be an increasing volume of electric vehicles, both preceding it and certainly after, that will come. And it will change. The facilities will change to meet that demand. But if we can assist it by making it clear about what we're supporting, by providing it ourselves through whatever means we can hopefully make sure that we're slightly ahead of the game and ahead of the need.
You could find these 24-hour petrol stations will put a bank of chargers instead of petrol pumps.
Yep. Much
and
like
as we shift from petrol to electric, then they might put another bank of electric charging points in rather than petrol. So and with 20 years time, there could be all electric charging points and no petrol. So
much like you're getting at the service stations on the strategic road network, that's already happening, where you do get banks of electric vehicle charging points already at those stops. So I think that's certainly the way this technology is going. And in terms of timescales, I mean, this position piece is put out there for a discussion over the summer with a view to bringing something back that sets it out in a more fixed position by the end of the year is our ambition. But that depends on what the discussions and debates take place through the next few months as we work with the districts and boroughs.
But that surely doesn't prevent anyone taking initiative now and sticking some charging points in their car parks or anything. So
not far from it, and we'll do what we can to support that.
Yeah. James.
Sorry, I'm a newbie, so bear with me. I'm learning all the time. Electric charging, great, has to come. I'm looking at the real world, which is now, and I have some issues. And issues the same as everybody else around the county is parking. My area is town, borough, and county. So I have a triple hat. I walk my areas, and we have a couple of streets there where Highways has done an excellent job. VOP is operational, great. Parking, nightmare, irrespective. I have a suggestion which I'm sure the committee will poo-poo, but I'd like to put it to you. Where there are council houses, where there's sufficient room in their front garden, I would like drop downs be put in. Firstly, it take a vehicle off the road. Secondly, just as important for the elderly people, where they have to be medically looked after, they can park. Where their relations can come in and park. I would like everybody to consider whether we can deal with it that way. I know that the costs are extra mile, but people can't afford that. So I'm going to suggest is if I'm allowed to use next year my HLB to do some of this as a test in the one street. Basically, that's what I really want to ask.
Without getting onto parking per se, because that's not what we're talking about, but your position on drop downs in council houses, I think is probably best levelled at district councils in the first instance, because we have no sort of say in what they do with their council houses. So if that's what you think could help, then please.
Yeah, but I'm also looking at, will HLB assist me with drop down as it's a county issue?
Probably something we could take offline, Phil, and
yeah.
Would you mind looking at it? Because to me, we have a diversified housing issue in Hatfield, from good to mediocre. Some of these roads are so narrow, there is no other solution. You can't make any more roads there. You can't get an ambulance down there sometimes. You know, it's a nightmare. But I'd be grateful if you guys could give it some thought.
Yeah, I think this is more a district issue, but if you started using your HLB on that, you'd soon run out of money, James, to be fair.
I wouldn't suggest
doing do one or two.
That's exactly my point. I'd like to be able to take, let's test it. You can get your money back if the person sells it or buys it, you can incorporate it. You can get it back if you turn around and have a new tenant. You can raise it slightly. We can recover a lot of that, but the essential part is we take the vehicle off the road. We help the residents to get their families in, right? And the dependent ones, the nurses, etc. That's just a suggestion.
Yeah, I suggest you have a word with districts about the council house stock and see what they can do.
I'm on the council anyway, so I can do that anyway. But I'd like you to have a look at it from a drop-down county issue.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We've got Stephen Giles with us again.
Thank you, Chair. I'd really do want to, I mean, to some extent it's now been answered a little bit by Rupert in terms of the answer about the timescale, because I didn't get that answer earlier, but it's not actually in the recommendations or indeed in the paper. So as I understand it, what you're now suggesting, or was suggested, like wasn't clear in the paper, that this is a position paper for discussion with the districts, although I think it should be expanded to include the housing associations, I have to say. They are major landholders. I think only one of the 10 districts has any housing stock that's in its ownership left. All the rest have been off-sold as part of government policy. So I think it needs to include the housing associations. And indeed, housing associations are big property developers. Well, they certainly are in my neck of the woods with the big developments. And indeed in Steve Cavender's division, where they're doing a massive new development. And I don't think they're putting in a single EV charging point in all the new parking places they're putting in. Not a single one's gone in. So, no, we have an issue there already. So can I be clear? The timescale is that this goes out for consultation, discussion, and we have a further report, next February. I assume it would be the February meeting that you want to come back with actually what we are going to do to get these on more chargers in place. The one area I still have a considerable concern out is the way position 1 is worded. HCC will not enable on-street EV chargers. And I have to say that's something I find in this current climate I can't support. We have to be able to enable them at the moment. We may want to be very careful where we enable them. But if we're saying point blank to, you know, Stevenage, St Albans, Watford, you can't have on-road chargers, well, that's 3 districts that are really going to be, I'll pick those out the top of my head, they're going to say, well, actually, we can't support this because we're putting them in now. We want to put them in. And the other relation to this is position 3 and 4 on new residential, non-residential development. And I alluded to this earlier when I mentioned about John Prescott and 1997. And in the case of Watford, a lot of the new residential development has no parking. How do we require the developers who are putting up, 1,000 new flats, 2 disabled blue badge bays, because that's what they only have to do, and no on-road park? But how do we get them, quite rightly in my view, to provide as part of the tariff, either as SIL or Section 106, money for charging points, which might well be in the local municipal car park for the car club and so on. So that needs to be built in my view, to your positions 3 and 4 statements and expectations. We should be getting developers to put these in. Fine when they're doing detached and semi-detached houses, it's taken for granted, but you won't get them to do it in blocks of flats when they're not providing parking. It needs to be part of the development and management comments back to developers. They're not let off the hook just because they're not providing no parking.
Well, on your last point, Stephen, I don't think you need to include a position statement, which is particularly as we are including that sort of stipulation in our place movement design guide. We're saying to developers, if you're building flats, then you should be looking to provide dedicated parking for your users. I mean,
well, that's exactly,
we're not stipulating exactly what.
No, but that's exactly the point, Phil.
So we don't.
Development management on plan applications in my division are not asking for parking places to be provided because it's not required, because these are car-free developments in central Watford. That's exactly the point.
And I think that's why, Stephen, you need the position piece to be firmed up so that we can clarify that kind of process, both between ourselves and the local planning authorities through the planning process, to be able to get a view that we're all signed up to, which is, if you're not providing parking spaces, what you are seeking to do is facilitate car clubs or electric vehicle charging provision in other alternative locations. I agree.
That's exactly right.
But have we not said developers are required to meet standards for EV charge point provision? How can we say more than that?
I think we have as far as we can at the moment, Phil. I think what the position piece can do is add some detail around that in specific scenarios, that may be one of which Stephen's set out. And I think that there's some quite good discussions we can have there with the LPAs, because, as you've said, it's not always the case that what we recommend necessarily is able to be taken through the planning process. So we need a sort of joined up approach that means we're all signed up to it and hopefully get a better outcome to assist with the provision of EV charging facilities.
Yeah. And the other point about, I think you've been giving what you're saying, Stephen, HCC will not label large scale rollouts. You're claiming that we're preventing on-road charging per se. We're not. We're saying we're not into large scale rollouts. So I don't think that's a valid point, to be fair. Graham.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Picking up on Stephen's points he's just made, I quite agree we can't enforce the developers to put in charging points because it's not a statutory requirement. But what I'm doing is I'm sitting down with the developers and speaking to them. And Bishop Stortford, or we probably got half a dozen or so charging points at the moment. But by the end of next year, we will probably have in excess of 150, or say 125 charging points. We've got 54 new charging points going in the new car park. The new school will have charging points. The industrial area that's going to be employing up to about 550 people will have charging points in every parking space. Over and above that, we'll have electric bicycle charging points. So you've got to sit down, speak to the developers, and the developers now realise that not doing anything isn't, they just can't do it. They've got to meet expectations. So whilst I agree with Stephen that you can't make them, they're ready and willing. Unless you sit down and speak to them, they will go over and above beyond the call of duty. Now, one of my sort of questions, not really sort of related to this, is that once all these chargers are in, fast chargers, rapid chargers, whatever, will the districts and county council have any influence over the price that's going to be charged? Because as you drive around, petrol stations have got different prices, and it's going to be no different. But I realise this is for another time rather than just now. But that's me, yeah.
Will there be any regulation in prices, do you think, Rupert? Because I notice about 20p difference between how I fill my car locally and what I spend on a motorway. So it's just basically captive audience, demand, supply, isn't it?
It is, although I suppose if you were to enter into a partnership with a provider within, let's say, your car park structure, you might have more say on it. But I imagine it would come back down to how much the local authorities are maybe taking out of the scheme. So I suppose if you're in the business, you have more say. If you're sitting on the sidelines, less so. And I imagine it will be market led.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, I see no more questions or hands up. So panels have been asked to sort of recommend, or we recommend no the content of EV charging infrastructure strategy, consider and endorse the following position statements 1, 2 and 3. So if I can ask you please to vote on that.
And Phil, are you going to put into this, there will be a report back having had this discussion to a future meeting of the Highways and Transport panel? Because it doesn't say that at the moment, and I think that's...
can you repeat the words, Stephen?
Well, a further 3.4, and that the draft strategy following consultation will be reported back or something along those lines. I'm sure you and the officers can come up with the appropriate word. I see Rupert nodding there, that along something along those lines.
Yeah.
Because the moment,
I mean,
left in the air, isn't it?
Well, it's implied, but I'm no problem in putting a statement to that effect to give some sort of timescale to it. So what do you think is reasonable, Rupert?
A lot of that's dependent on the discussions we have, but I think Stephen suggested something in the new calendar year, so I think we could work towards that before the end of the financial year, Phil.
So for Teresa's benefit, if we can be clear about the wording here.
That I suppose on completion of the discussions, a further paper will be brought to panel setting out the position. A confirmed position.
Expected the beginning of next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So with that addition, if you could please, are you happy with that, Teresa?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So with that provision, if you could vote and chat, please.
That's agreed, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we move on to item 6, COVID-19 High Street response updates. Rupert.
Yeah, Fred, that's me again, Phil. So, yep, this is really an update paper for the panel to understand where we are with the high street schemes. Oh, sorry about this.
Your cat again?
No, it's my little girl, I'm afraid. Okay, so about a year ago, we put in a set of measures in May 2020 in response to the COVID-19 pandemic to aid social distancing and to ensure that we were providing space in those busy town centre environments where the existing street layout didn't really enable people to keep their two meters apart, and we felt that extra space would be able to aid that. We worked with public health to identify the locations, and very swiftly, not in a manner that we would usually take in terms of maybe not consulting fully or going out to the public on this, we implemented a set of measures in a temporary form, largely made up of red and white barriers, signage, and temporary measures. Over the next few months, we work very closely with districts, boroughs and local councillors to help fine-tune those measures on the ground and make sure that they were still fulfilling the role, but whilst maybe working slightly more effectively and certainly becoming more attractive when we were working with the districts to use the Restoring Your High Streets Fund that's sought to enable us to put planters, planting and other street furniture and bollards in place to replace some of the red and white barrier. They were all deployed as temporary COVID-19 response measures. However, since a number of them have gone in, we've had varying views given about them, but positive and negative. And in a number of locations, there appears to be a level of support for them to remain in one way or another, not necessarily in their current form, but some of the benefits they've brought to reduction in traffic, making it easier for people to walk and cycle, air quality improvements, and just a general feeling that it makes the shopping and user environment more pleasant has led to some people asking for longer term change. Equally, there's some locations where quite clearly they served a purpose. Public Health confirmed earlier in May that as we came out of lockdown, those measures weren't really necessary any longer. And in discussion with the local county councillors after the elections, we agreed that some of them would be removed. So Ware, Nebworth being two examples. On those that remain, we'll be going out to a public engagement, or we are out to a public engagement process that is now going to run through to the 11th of July. And we're seeking people's views on a number of questions on an online survey to understand things that they like, things that they don't like, and what it may be, whether they'd like them to remain, to be removed, or changes made for them to stay in for a trial period. All of them would be taken forward for a trial. And from that perspective, there would be a further formal consultation once that trial ceased after 12 to 18 months, and the traffic regulation order would need to be confirmed or otherwise, and the site may revert to what it was previously, or it could revert to a new arrangement. That's where we are at this moment in time. For those sites where this engagement proves that people would like there to be a trial, we will be working very closely with the districts and boroughs to make sure they're signed up to it. These schemes need their support to be successful. If we don't have that support, they're not going to work. In a number of locations, it's as simple as who's going to open and close gates and keep them locked, who's going to manage the parking regulations that are in place to make them work. And obviously, we also need to work with other stakeholders like the police and the emergency services to make sure that they can be successfully operated as life starts to return to normal and we're getting higher levels of footfall and traffic elsewhere on the network. I think that's probably where we are, Phil.
Okay, thank you. Richard.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, figure 2, page 105 of the agenda pack, for instance, we see an image of Boreham Wood High Street there. That is not how figure 2 currently looks. It hasn't done since the restaurants were allowed to eat back inside. It's been emptied. The public are taking it into their own hands and actually ripping those bollards out the ground. They're being dumped in planters. It's quite clear that that is not necessary, you know, that social distance area is not necessarily in Boreham Wood High Street anymore. I appreciate the top end of Boreham Wood High Street. There seems to be more of an impact, and actually people seem to be using it, especially the businesses there. I'll be curious to see what other members and colleagues have to say regarding their areas, because obviously it is different throughout Hertfordshire, and I'm sure that in some areas of Hertfordshire it's actually a real benefit. I noticed also on the percentage term, I saw a percentage thing of 64% for the Hertsmere area, or the Boreham Wood area anyway, saying, oh yes, they're in favour of this. I'd like to know actually the real number of that percentage. We're great at running percentages in all ways to make it look better for us, but actually I'd like to really see the real number. So I'd like that detail if you have it to hand, please. If not, I'd like it emailed to me. The questionnaire, I actually sat down and done this questionnaire myself, and again I'll be curious to see what other colleagues have done with this questionnaire, but I feel like it's really targeted, these questions. It's not very specific to a particular area that's actually targeted to, like for instance my high street, where one area it's clearly not necessary anymore, the other side of it is. So it's targeted to the whole wider scheme, and I don't think that's right. So I'd like to see more detail on that, and I think the questionnaire is wrong. I asked a question at the full council, and I appreciate your comment, Phil, that actually, yeah, we have to do all the consultation things properly. But when members of the public are actually ripping these bollards up themselves and removing them, I think the members of the public may have already spoken. So I'll be curious to see if that area will actually be removed sooner rather than later. We talk about talking to disability groups. Actually, there's a lot of people who are disabled who need access to some of these parking areas, because it's literally directly outside the post office and things like that that they use on a daily basis. And we've only got one disabled space within that area. And again, I'd be curious to know what other areas of Hertsmere, or Hertfordshire rather, are suffering like as well. And also bus providers. We say on the consultation there that we're talking to public transport providers. I'd be curious to know actually more detail on what bus providers have actually said and how it's impacted in them, especially going around the town centres and city centres. So thank you for that. Look forward to the answers.
Just one of your points about these people that are digging these things up. It only takes a few idiots, you know. That's not a consultation. That's just a few idiots doing criminal damage, basically. Anyway, you can be a bit more calm about that.
There are a lot of questions there, and we are obviously running this over a number of high streets in Hertfordshire at the moment. So one thing I would say in relation to the survey is there is an ability for you to put specific points on a map to make a particular point about a particular location. So I think there is an ability for people to be specific, and we are encouraging people to be specific over it. We are waiting until the 11th of July for the sites where we've agreed to leave the measures in for now, so that we can ensure that we are taking on board the engagement feedback and not acting in advance of that decision or guidance being made, to enable us to have a discussion with the local members, with stakeholders, so that a decision can be reached that everybody's bought into. And I think it's important that runs, you know, that the ones where we took it out, there was a general agreement in that area that they would be removed in advance of it.
Sorry, Rupert, where these ones are being removed is now actually a danger to public, because if someone's walking down that road, it wouldn't take much for a car to actually drive into it. If you look at that image on figure 2 on page 105 of the agenda pack, you can see clearly they're not strong enough. If a car was to plough into that, we'd have a real crisis on our hands. So I really do recommend that Hertfordshire do remove those sooner rather than later.
We will consider that, Councillor Butler, and I know we've had discussions around it, and it might be that we need to reinforce it temporarily until the engagement's completed, because I think we are keen to make sure that we get the feedback. Equally, if people aren't sitting there, I don't think there's so much of a hazard if that is the case, but we will get out there and review it off the back of this. The survey was quite carefully constructed by our community, or in conjunction with our communications team, to make sure that we captured the key points and tried to get some clarity out of the process to help guide the discussions going forward. And there is a mixed view across a number of the locations, with some getting very, very high response rates, and some getting very, very strong support, and others getting very low support and very poor response rates. And we're trying to do what we can through social media and local awareness to encourage as many people to respond, and hence the extension to the engagement process.
think it's fair to say, Rupert, we've got no agenda here. If people want it, they can have it. If they don't, they don't have it. I mean, and it's not trying to force anything on anyone, like we had to in what was it,
May last year.
Last year we had to force it, but now in that we're trying to find out exactly what people want on the ground.
Exactly, and it's a trial, Phil. What I would really reiterate is this isn't a decision whether the road is going to stay like that forever. It's a decision on whether you want to change it, tweak it, give it a chance to see what people make of it, and then formally consult to form and opine on a view that will remain longer term.
Yeah. Because I know as an example, I know where High Street is the one that always sticks in my mind because we made it a completely one-way street, and lots of people up in arms. Then lots of people, the quiet majority, didn't say anything. Anyway, that was coming out, so there's no argument on that one. So, Paul, you're on mute, Paul. Paul.
That better?
Yep. Yeah.
Right. Okay, I'm better on mute. I don't upset people.
Yeah.
Not I'm about to. I just wanted to seek clarity, and I think Rupert's just given it. The consultation that's being done now is purely to see that it stays in for a longer period to trial it, and then there will be a final consultation at the end. Because I've had two different stories that this is the only consultation, which is what I understood, because obviously up until now the high street has been used by fewer people, with COVID, lockdown, shielding. As we move forward, the hope is high streets recover, more people will come out, we'll see what's happened, what's being done in the high street, and it will change the perception. So that's why it's important to have the second consultation further down the road, to say, does it stay in there? Have we got any changes? So can you just confirm that's what's happening?
Can definitely confirm that, Paul. This is an engagement process now to help local stakeholders agree on a process that happens next, i.e., does it come out? Does it stay in, or does a slightly revised version stay in for a trial? And all, either staying in or a revised version are both for a trial period that would be supported by an experimental traffic regulation order that would be formally consulted upon as part of the process before a decision is made on whether or not it remains.
Thank you,
Giles Medhurst.
Yeah, so as I think you just clarified it. That was my understanding, that in terms of the press release that's gone out and the current documents that have gone out, is it would be for a further 18 months from January of next year, unless they were removed as part of this. And you're nodding there, so I'm assuming that is the case. So we're looking therefore taking it to 2023.
Timescales I'm not so certain of, Stephen. It depends how quickly we can, depends how many we get, how quickly we can clarify what it will be like on site, and how quickly we can get the orders promoted is part of the challenge around that.
Okay, just the press release says for a further 18 months. Yeah. That's what the official county
up to 18 months.
Yeah, well, it says just says for it could remain in place for a further 18 months. I've got it in front of me. That's fine. But trolling back, I wanted to thank Rupert in particular, because I had a lot of inputs wearing another hat at chair in relation to the Rickmansworth scheme, with the then county councillor covering that, and indeed the district councillors. And we did a lot of joint working with the district to make sure that scheme works in the manner in which it is currently working, including additional provisions of parking bays elsewhere away from it. So it can be done. But these schemes will only work in cooperation with the districts and the borough councils, I think. It's not a question of the county saying this scheme is it, and we'll take this road space out or these parking bays out. It has to be done jointly. Ironically, Phil, it's not your fault, or indeed any officer's fault. We're still waiting for the bus shelter that was ordered in December last year to go in Northway. Apparently it's been held up by endless red tape and EU regulations and parts from China. So you just wouldn't believe the sort of problems to get a single bus shelter in. But what I wouldn't want to thank is the officers for the perseverance on this. My only slight disappointment, I suppose, is that we're consulting on this and we had already removed 5 schemes. I appreciate there were concerns, and I was certainly aware of the issues in Radlett, and I was shown some photographs, and they were on Facebook, of people with large 4x4s basically driving along and pushing the bollards out of the way so they could then park, which of course was not the intention of the scheme, to make it safer for pedestrians. But I think we have to learn from COVID opportunities, and this is a COVID opportunity, in my view, of enhancing some of these local centres by allowing more alfresco dining and allowing for greater trader improvements in the wider sphere. So I'm pleased we're consulting. I hope we won't radically remove any of them unless there quite clearly is an overwhelming need to do so. And if obviously there are safety issues, they do need to be addressed. But it's a question of working together with the districts.
Thank you. Annie.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so I caveat what I say being a great active travel fan, as you know, Rupert and Phil. But thank you for extending the deadline. That's really helpful to try and get it out to more people. I think you know a lot of my views, but the St Albans scheme, because it's 7 roads, each road will have to be looked at really differently because each one's got very different issues attached to it. And I think that the consultation tends to perhaps talk more about the pedestrianisation and the positive things rather than mention traffic displacement. So what I was going to ask is, may for outer members also be consulted when we come to reviewing the data, because it will impact people coming into St Albans as well. And in terms of the, is there an interim timing? I didn't quite understand that bit. Are we saying that they will stay shut if it looks popular, it will stay shut from this moment on for 18 months, or it'll open again and then shut from February?
No, they remain closed.
Okay, so that's very important.
They remain in their current state,
yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah. So all the interim work that actually would help us gauge our response, such as say traffic data, disabled parking spaces, those things will have to be done at a later date then.
Or based on prior.
I think. Okay, so we can look at that now. Lovely. And then the last thing is outside dining. Obviously, it's a difficult time of year to ask people's opinion because it couldn't be nicer right at the moment. I don't know, does County have a policy for outdoor heaters? Looking at our sort of climate change agenda. I just wondered if County has a policy, and in fact, if other districts and boroughs do. Thank you.
I think on the heaters, Phil, I think there is a network management view, but I'd have to ask Steve to confirm that. Maybe we can do that as a note after the meeting. I don't think it's generally permitted.
Be interesting because, I mean, districts are responsible for air quality and they measure. I'm wondering who is responsible for sort of saying yes or no to patio heat or a heater. That might be a planning issue. I don't know. Yeah, but if you could answer that and come back to us, that'd be great.
Thank you.
I know I was talking to a friend about the dining in Stevenage Old Town, and he said, what's going to happen in the winter? I said, well, lots of people don't mind sitting under patio heaters. That's no good for the atmosphere. So you can't win. You can't win. As I said in the briefing, you'll upset 50% of the people 100% of the time. I think that, oh yeah, we've got Rena wants to talk.
Just to ask a question, the TRO is for 18 months and anything could happen in 18 months. And during that duration, if anything changes, like lockdown is completely lifted and we find that the sheer volume of traffic is pedestrian footfall is not conducive for some of the restrictions, do we have the ability to quickly pivot to make changes or remove anything or do whatever is needed to make things safe and make sure things flow properly?
I think we do in emergency traffic situations, I suppose. You know, the temporary order doesn't mean that it has to remain in for the 18 months. A decision could be made that the trial would be finished sooner. I think it's a difficult one to do that without reaching a consensus amongst the stakeholders, because that is what this process is all about. So I think it would be that you bring everybody together in the light of concerns raised and try to form a view as a group sooner than you would do if you were waiting to the end of the process. But I do think we can be responsive to those sorts of challenges and make sure that those people are aware of who they are, what they are, and the decisions that would need to be reached. So yes, I think is the answer.
Comparison, wandering down central London, sometimes you can see things are back. Some streets are very, very full with people, and like you're saying, if it could be that the district and the borough, and the district, the parish, and whoever else, and the county councils could have that meeting, if there was a need, the TRO is not set in stone for 18 months. You can give it out.
Yeah, there's also a case, surely, for any trial, you need to give it some time to bed in, because people need to get used to different ways of doing things, and so therefore you can't just take the sort of knee-jerk reaction and take it out just because there's loads of people and you don't think it's working. You've got to give it time for people to get used to it and say, oh yeah, this isn't a bad way to do things. Let's go with it, sort of thing.
And we really don't know what traffic, pedestrian footfall's going to look like as we start to come out of COVID. We know traffic flows are different to what they were before. We know there's nearly as much traffic on the network as there was before, but we know it's behaving quite differently. So as that picture starts to emerge, I think it is about those groups, having discussions, having debate, and being clear on their expectations of what they want to achieve longer term.
Yeah, I think that's exactly my point. We don't know yet, so there is pivot space if we need it.
Okay, everyone, we're asked to note the process set out in the paper in terms of community and stakeholder engagement on next steps. If you can vote through chat, please. I think it's fair to say that was noted, although I haven't had the confirmation. We have a decision to make because we've got 2 more items and it's getting on to 4 o'clock when we should be offering a 15-minute break. Is the MRT going to be a lengthy presentation, Rupert?
No.
No. Okay. So unless anyone violently objects, I propose going right through to conclusion. Anyone doesn't like that, if you can put so in chat. Okay, we seem to be good to go. So I think it's Ian, isn't it, on the Active Travel Fund update, item 7?
Yep. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll just give a very short intro on the paper. I'll take it as read, and then there'll be opportunity for members to ask any questions. So we're kind of in the middle. We carried out an engagement exercise earlier in the spring, take on board people's views, and then since then we've been developing designs, ready to start a consultation in July. There's been quite a lot of liaison with boroughs and districts and with local members on this, so some of you will be aware of some of the details as you've got schemes in your area. Just a bit of flesh on the bones. We are targeting the consultation period to start on the 30th of June for a 4-week period. So at the moment, we are officers are just finalising content in terms of what it's going to say about the scheme. We're going to provide a simplified drawing rather than a sort of technical engineer's version, and an artist's impression at one particular location for each of the sites. So officers will be in touch with the relevant local members on that shortly, so you'll be able to have a look at that prior to the consultation going live. We are proposing to take the 8 schemes listed in the paper forward to the consultation at the moment. There's a couple of others that we're going to go through a slightly different process. We found that the use of postcards that we did for the engagement was really good. We got quite high engagement on that, as we did with social media. So we're going to be using those techniques again as we look to consult, as long as some of the more traditional press releases, etc. When we get to the end of July and the results are in, there's some quite key decisions will need to be made. So we'll look at the results of those consultations, and then we'll need to make a decision of what we actually look to implement. And we'll note from the paper that we've intentionally, in a sense, over-programmed our consultation on the basis that some of those schemes might not go forward. The original bid we had put in, we had 6 schemes, and we're consulting on more than that at the moment, kind of intentionally. That's kind of where we are at the moment. So a lot of activity, and you'll note some press, I'm sure, and some comms coming forward in the next few weeks.
Any questions, comments, issues? Early days, of course, so we don't know what the consultation is going to be. So, Stephen. Giles Medhurst.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Mark Watkins would have been here, but he had a CT scan to go to today, because he would have made some comments in relation to this, and I think this won't come as a surprise to some officers, in that the local member does not support the proposal in relation to Stratford Way, junction with Hempstead Road, and although he pleads that the original proposals for the Castleby low traffic neighbourhood are withdrawn, he's disappointed that the alternative that they put forward, himself and the local members, for a low traffic scheme on the Castleby estate hasn't been supported as part of the ATF scheme, and he would want me to make those points. The other point, and I made it at the briefing meeting, and I made it earlier this afternoon, Chairman, is all very well having percentages, but you know, that's 53% of Wigan Hall Road could have been 4 people in favour and 2 people saying no, for all I know. It probably wasn't, but it could have been, in terms of 53 to 31. So if we're having percentages, can we have actual numbers, please, in reports, so it puts it in context as to actually, you know, 5,000 people support North Road in Stevenage, and you know, only 1,000 people don't support the North Road plans in Stevenage. I've absolutely no idea if that's the case or not, because percentages can be made to mean anything at the end of the day.
And how do you judge the ones that don't respond, Stephen?
Well, again, you've got the percentage there. I mean, it's not so you can only go on
if 80% of people don't respond.
No. Well,
if 80% of people don't respond.
If you want to take that on board, Chairman, that's entirely up to you. But
go on.
As you know, as a Stevenage Borough Councillor, undoubtedly, where you do parking consultations, if people don't respond, you only take on board the people that have responded, is either for or against. That is the way the policies are taken forward. All I want to know is, of that 76, 79% on any of these, is that 100 people, 500 people, 10 people? Because it just makes it much more factually understandable as to the level of actual support here. That's all.
I think that's a valid point, Stephen. We've got the numbers, and we'll seek to ensure that we put them alongside the responses, and we're already doing that for the High Streets presentations that I spoke about just now. So if anybody does want those details, get in touch with Ian, and we've got them for each individual project.
Yeah, it's not intended as a criticism, Chair, or Rupert. It's just having put it in perspective as to public engagement, because these can be. But I do need to make a point about the Stratford Way one. Now, in terms of what goes out here, because it does say on paragraph 6.8 each project has been engaged with, each council has been engaged with developing the consultation material. Well, of course, the local county council does not support the Stratford Way Junction proposals. So I'm not sure how you deal with that in any consultation material.
Yeah, can I come in there if that's okay? Just on the Stratford Way. So it's actually been me that's been speaking with Mark about this kind of throughout. So Stephen, what you're saying isn't a complete surprise to me. I think where we got to is, I think we're in a place where I believe we've agreed that we go to consultation. Of course, we will review the results of that consultation in consultation with the member when we've got that information.
Okay.
And as I said, in terms of the numbers,
who's speaking? Were you speaking still, Ian?
so I thought you just all I was going to say was that was the response on the Stratford Way, and I can, as Rupert said, the numbers we've got are per town, so I can provide the responses, the number of responses per town if requested.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing because I mean I'm fully aware what the consultation rules are, Stephen, but I make a quick sort of a jovial gesture, because if 100 people are surveyed and only 10 respond and 100% of those people say yes, what can you do? You've got to say 90 people that didn't respond. So if they didn't respond, does that mean to say, well, I don't really care? You know, it's just an interesting question when you do these consultations, how you actually read them. But if that's all we got, if we've only got a limited response and most of them say yes, then, or most say no, we have to abide by that, don't we, Rupert? Jeff.
Yeah, similar question, really. It does concern me. So with this consultation, forgive me, I thought we'd already had a consultation on it, but I now believe that was an engagement exercise. Now,
yes, yeah.
So a lot of people have responded to that. Now what will happen so soon after is that a consultation will come out, and I'm afraid people will think to themselves, hang on, I've already responded to this, so I don't need to respond again. So it can be a little bit confusing. And if you can just clarify, okay, so we've got 8 schemes and the target is to bring that down to 6, is that correct? And is that as a result of the consultation will determine what the 6 are? Because, you know, in these consultations, I mean, as we all know, you find that if everybody's sort of in agreement with it, they don't tend to respond. It's only those that are very vocally against it tend to respond. So it doesn't give a good balance. And that is what worries me about any decision making with a consultation. Yes, it might give you a flavour. But yeah, if you can just clarify that, is this the way we're going to whittle it down from 8 to 6? And I did notice in the list that you've got, there seems to be 11 schemes in the summary of schemes. So perhaps some of them are repeated. And I do agree, it probably needs figures there that, you know, the number of 79%. I think that would certainly help. But yeah, it just worries me that the decision making is going to come from a consultation that people will think they've already submitted.
We did just in response to that point, Jeff, and I completely appreciate the points you're making. There's several aspects to this. One is we've been asked by the DFT, who've awarded us the funding, to make sure that we are carrying out both engagement and formal consultations on this, and to ensure that we are engaging fully with the community, because they want us to take schemes forward where they have support. It's interesting that DFT have got a belief that probably over 70% of people are broadly supportive of these sorts of measures in reality, but what we do is exactly the problem you've identified, is we struggle to engage with that part of the community that has a fair either ambivalence or a level of support that says, yeah, I'm happy with that, it sounds like a sensible idea, and how do we get them to tell us that, rather than only those that are more concerned about stopping the scheme from proceeding. So it's dead right, is a challenge. We did make it clear with the initial engagement that we went out with that it was a first stage to a formal process that would be following. But whether that sticks in people's minds or not is a different matter. And we will be trying to make it clear through this next round of engagement that this is the point at which the schemes get decided upon. So hopefully that will seek to draw out a view from them. But as ever, engagement and consultation with communities is really, really difficult. Just through the debate we've been having about how we do it, how do we understand what's the level of support, who do we include, who do we not include, are all really, really difficult things for us to manage. And for us to then be able to communicate to local members, stakeholders, so that a view can be formed on what should be taken forward. And on the point of the ones that are taking forward, yes, clearly the consultation will be a large factor in it, but equally we have to consider deliverability, fundability. So if all of the very expensive schemes came to the top of the list, we might have some difficult decisions to make. However, if they don't, it may well be the top 6 that get taken forward.
Okay, yeah,
Well,
thanks.
it might not even be 6. It might
really
be 6, Jeff, because we got £6.4 million to spend.
Well, that's true.
And I know
that's
what
my
we're going to spend.
particular,
But
and I know that the one in my division, I believe I'm right in saying is probably one of the most expensive. But I mean, there again, going back to that one, Rupert, I think when we looked at, sorry to be parochial, but the one in my division, we did look at like a plan B for it. A cheaper scheme that would still bring benefits. So
but that's a scheme that we're currently checking. For example, Jeff, we have done that and we have worked it up, but we're checking with DFT that they would still be happy for the funding to be used to deliver it, because it doesn't meet what might be called the current standards that they're expecting around these bids. So there's a lot of obstacles as we navigate our way through this process to make sure that we're clear on what it is we can and want to do and how we're going to do it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay. And I just hope you take into consideration quite strongly the key stakeholders. I think they are key to it, no matter what the consultation results bring. Thanks very much.
I mean, it's very much driven. I really sort of got the message from the rollout of social distancing measures and all the adverse feedback that everyone received. They made it very clear this time that they would not release any money unless we committed to engagement and consultation.
Yeah. But again, once again,
the initial engagement, but if I can finish, Jeff, the consultation is on the detail. Now, if the details go back to the DFT, because they have got very, very clear guidelines as to how we can spend their money. So we can't just pop things in just because we think it's good. The DFT in principle is quite a complex situation. I wouldn't like to be in officer's shoes at the moment, to be honest with you. So you wanted to say something?
I forgot what I was going to say now. Yes, that's a classic example with the high streets. Is that the vocal ones against it? They're the ones you hear about. Everyone else is quite happy with it.
I quite agree with you.
We've seen that in Ware, of course.
I'm like the rules on content. Yeah. Stephen, Charles Medhurst.
Yeah, I was actually only briefly acting to support what you're saying there, because I've had this conversation on the 2 schemes in my division. And actually, this is a more detailed design that's going out to people having got through the informal process. So, and hopefully that will flesh out. And certainly I would encourage members to encourage people to respond if they are in favour, because these are then likely to be built, subject obviously to the funding issues. So, or at least implemented, because some of them don't actually need much measures. So certainly the ones in certainly one of them in particular in my division, in terms of market, is very well supported. Wigan Hall perhaps a little bit less so, but once the details gone out there, I think people can see actually the benefits of the possible improvements.
Hopefully, Stephen. I mean, that is the very point of the process we've been through, which was to go out, show people a broad idea of what we want to achieve, get their feedback, and then come back to them with a worked up version that says we've listened to what you've told us, we've taken on board all those comments where we can, and this is what the scheme looks like as a result. Does it now meet your sort of expectations and do you like it or not? That's the crude process we've been through. But I do understand going back to people twice can sometimes mean that you lose some engagement through those stages. So we need to be clear on how we communicate and what we're telling people.
Okay, no more hands up. So can I ask panel to note the analysis of the initial engagement exercise in July and subsequent analysis and prioritisation. Yeah.
Phil is not altering my vote in terms of noting it, but could it be noted in the minutes that I did raise Mark Watkins' concern in relation to the Stratford Way junction? Just that's all that needs to be in the minutes.
Yeah.
I'll put it in the minutes.
Okay.
My hand was not going up. I don't know if it's too late. I just had a question, and if it's too late, it's too late. I'm just looking at some of the engagement notices that people have put up, and there's asking about the conflicts between pedestrians and cyclists and what will be the provision. So are these going to be designated cycle lanes or routes? I'm new to the whole scheme, so I'm trying to read. I just was wondering how we ensure that we promote walking, but also safe walking and safe cycling.
Yeah, and
did you want to take that?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a combination of interventions, Councillor Ranger, so that some of them will be dedicated cycle lanes. We have got some stretches with shared use. The key thing from the Department for Transport's perspective is there's some new guidance out on how we build cycle lanes, and that's what they're looking for us to follow with this funding. They've been very clear with us on that. So it's a combination of shared use and some dedicated cycle lanes. But we've had a lot of conversations with our colleagues in road safety just to make sure the things such as conflicts between pedestrians and cyclists were taken into account.
Okay, thank you. Everyone, Massachusetts Rapid Transit System used to be called MRT, but it's now been rebadged to include Essex as some hopefully potentially going to their county. But over to you, Rupert.
Yep. Okay. So yeah, this is really just an update paper to let members know what we've been up to for the last year on the Mass Rapid Transit, now called the Herts and Essex Rapid Transit Project. So, as you know, we adopted the A414 strategy towards the tail end of 2019. One of the key schemes to help, I suppose, meet the challenges of 50,000 new homes, similar number of new jobs within 5 kilometres of the A414 road corridor was to consider and promote a mass rapid transit solution that made it easier for people to look at sustainable transport options. Alongside that, I suppose it's worth noting that it doesn't work in isolation. It needs to work with a fundamental shift in the way that transport is considered within the county, both supported by the Sustainable Travel Town process that we're going through, implementation of multimodal transport hubs, and that continued move towards the LTP4 objectives of getting people to use the right mode for the right journey. So in terms of the A414, in terms of the Herts, we've been working on the strategic outline business case with a view to taking that to government towards the end of this calendar year, start of next year. And to do that, what we want to be able to do is demonstrate that we've been out engaged with our stakeholders and our communities along the route so that they can understand what it is we're trying to achieve and they can feed back on the objectives and ambitions that we've set out in these early stages of its development. Within the paper, you'll see there that we've identified a number of options that are currently being considered at a strategic level, so that the kind of fast end-to-end journeys versus the slower stopping service that makes sure it gets to most of the destinations that people might want in a sort of staged approach, or an optimized version that would be considered more akin to the network max that's set out there in the paper. I was just going to try and find the number for you on the. So that's in item number 4.12. At this stage, I'd make it clear that there isn't a decision reached on the sorts of vehicles that would run along this corridor. This is more about identifying the right routes, where it serves and how it serves them. So will it go through town centres, around town centres, rather than getting hung up on whether it's a train, a bus or a tram. It's likely, however, as new technologies emerge, that it's going to be something that's rubber tired, but whether that's autonomous, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's electric, whether it's guided by technologies or potentially different bits of kit is unknown. The route covers the section for new members from Hemel and Watford in the west, all the way through to Harlow and Stansted Airport, potentially onto the east, a route of about 40 plus kilometres, which is one of the largest scale infrastructure projects in this part of the world, probably for the last 35 years, since the M25 or something like that. So it's big. We estimate that the development of the business case stages is going to be something in the region of £4 to £5 million. And I know Mark and Patsy have been having those discussions with government through the Growth Board, and potentially the scheme is a £2 billion plus project to be delivered. However, as I say, that we haven't fleshed out the understanding of what it is enough, but we are working with districts and boroughs through the joint strategic plan and local plan to ensure that it gets the policy hooks that it's going to need to enable its delivery and potential funding mechanisms going forward. Like I say, the next steps are for us to go out and start to engage with stakeholders towards the end of this month after the Growth Board, with a view to going out to the communities more broadly once awareness has been raised in the autumn, to seek their feedback on the thoughts, the objectives and the direction of the project so far, to make sure that it's meeting their ambitions. I think that's it, Phil.
Okay, any questions on that? Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. This is a great scheme. It really is. It's obviously going to be a long way off to come to fruition. But yeah, in the planning process for this, I just wonder whether we ought to look a little bit wider with it. You've got fantastic east to west, Hemel all the way to Stansted, for instance, but certainly what would be useful, and I think I've mentioned this before, is connection hubs from other parts of the county. I'm thinking from the north, where our transport connections in the north of Hertfordshire are not brilliant. Some sort of connection, and then it might be a central reservation guided bus or something from Royston all the way down to, let's say, Hertford, to pick up this east-west and west-east system would be really beneficial. The same, of course, from Broxbourne going north. So there could be great benefits to having hubs connecting into it. It's pity we haven't got the map. You did show a really good diagram. I think it was this morning, Rupert, but it's not in the report. But I don't know, perhaps we should be looking a little bit wider, or do you really think that's something further down the line that we need to consider?
I think you're right, Jeff. What I would say is, in the first instance, we do think that it's likely to need to serve and work with a number of stations. It dissects all of the railway lines across the county, from the West Coast Main Line across to the Anglia Main Line on the east. So those north-south connections are able to be facilitated, and it does allow a number of different journey options to the ones that are currently available. And if that can be supplemented, working with existing bus operators of the future, and the integrated transport unit team to fill the gaps where we can, where maybe the rail infrastructure doesn't get all the communities that we'd like to connection to this sort of route, then that's something we need to work on as the scheme starts to fill out. I think it's it's a bit like an elephant. You can't eat it all at once. So you've got to work out where you're going to focus first of all. And then as it starts to become clearer what it looks like, it's how we embellish it and make the most of the opportunity. And like I say, the town's along its length, we need to change to facilitate it, as I think will most of Hertfordshire's transport network, to make the most from it. I don't think there's a single community in Hertfordshire that won't really be indirectly affected by it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, wouldn't it be great that system would serve the whole of Hertfordshire? You know, it would benefit the whole of Hertfordshire. Yeah. No, great. Thank you.
For sure. I mean, I'm making sure that wherever this thing stops, there are links to wherever people want to go.
Yeah.
There's no point in having a link if no one wants to go there. But if there's a link, then it should be there. Now, whether it be by road, bus, or train, or whatever in the initial stages, you could find that in years to come, demand says, right, let's have an offshoot of this onto going up to Royston or something like that. You know, who knows what could happen? Could start somewhere.
Yeah, it could carry on up to Cambridge. Who knows? You know.
Let's join on to the rail link up to Manchester. You know.
Yeah. Well, there you are.
Well, part of that is the discussions we've been having with Essex. You know, this is going to need to cross sort of boundaries, and certainly making use of networks beyond Hertfordshire is something that, you know, we want to see what the opportunities are.
Yeah.
Not just east, it might be to the west as well.
Yeah.
As north south in the county. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Any other issues on that one? Okay, we're asked to note the progress made so far and the proposed engagement approach. Thank you.
Item noted, Chairman.
Looks as though that's noted. Thank you. Okay, 9. There's no other Part 1 business. There's no part business. So thank you all for attending. Good meeting, and especially thanks to Elaine and Teresa for keeping us in order. So thank you, girls.
Brilliant.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Really interesting meeting. Thanks, Phil, and everyone. Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.